There's a moment, and if you've lived long enough, you've felt it, when a person stands at the very edge of everything they have left, and they make a choice that sounds desperate but is actually the bravest thing they've ever done. This isn't a love story, not at first. It's a story about what happens when two people who have lost almost everything are forced to share the wreckage, and what quietly grows in the space between survival and trust. She showed up at his gate with nothing but a child on her hip, mud on her boots, and words that should have sounded like begging, but somehow came out sounding like iron. He should have sent her away. Any sensible man would have. He didn't. What followed wasn't romance the way stories usually tell it, soft light, easy glances, hearts that open like windows on a spring morning. What followed was harder than that. Quieter, more real. It was two people learning to stop flinching around each other. Learning that staying, just choosing to stay, can be its own kind of courage. Stay with this story, all three parts of it. Because the ending doesn't come with a bow on it, and that's exactly what makes it worth your time. I keep a logbook, have since my father pressed it into my hands the morning I buried him, told me a man who doesn't write down what happens to him starts forgetting what's real. I thought that was about the saddest piece of wisdom I'd ever heard. Still do, but I keep the book. Most entries are dry. Check the east fence, lost a calf to coyotes. Rain held off again, practical things, the kind of things that don't hurt to read back. The entry for the 14th of April, 1883, starts like this. A woman came to the gate today. I should have sent her home. She had no home. That was the whole problem. It had been a cold morning for April, the kind that fools you right around 8 o'clock when the sun gets bright and you think you've seen the end of it. Then the wind picks back up from the north and reminds you that the land doesn't care what month it is. I was mending harness in the barn doorway, sitting half in the cold, half in the dusty warmth of the straw when I heard the gate creak. Not the cattle gate, the small one at the front, the one that opened onto the road. That gate was stiff and heavy and nobody used it without purpose. Traveling salesmen sometimes. The occasional circuit preacher. Once, a marshal looking for a man who hadn't come through my property at all, and I told him so 3 times before he believed me. I set down the harness and looked. She was standing just inside the gate like she wasn't sure she had the right to come further. One hand on the latch still, the other wrapped around a child pressed against her hip. Small boy, maybe 3 years old, maybe 4, face half buried against her shoulder and one bare foot hanging down. Bare, in that wind. She was wearing a dress that had been brown at some point, and was now the color of everything, dirt and dried creek mud, and something else I didn't want to study too closely. Her hair was dark and pulled back without much care, pieces of it loose across her face. She was holding herself straight, which is the thing I noticed before anything else. Not bent, not curled inward the way people get when they're truly broken, straight-backed, chin up, like the posture was the only thing she was sure of anymore. I walked toward her. I'm not a fast walker, never have been. My right knee was stove up from a fence post that fell on it 2 winters prior, and it reminds me of that fact every time the temperature drops. So I walked toward her the way I walk everywhere, deliberate and a little lopsided, and she watched me come without moving. When I was close enough to see her face properly, I saw that her lip was split. Old split a few days healed, scabbed over. And her left eye had the yellow-green shadow of a bruise that was almost gone, but not quite. I stopped, she didn't look away. Morning, I said, because that's what you say. Morning, her voice was steadier than I expected. Low, almost flat, like she'd burned through everything that could make it waver. Are you the man that owns this place? I am Calhoun Briggs. She nodded. I need to speak to you about something. All right. She adjusted the boy on her hip. He stirred slightly, turned his face a little further away from me. Shy or sleeping, I couldn't tell which. My name is Marin Lyle, she said. My husband died 11 days ago, fever. We had a claim out east of Pixton, about 20 miles. She paused, not for effect. She paused the way people pause when they're making sure their voice stays even. His brother came 3 days after we buried him, said the claim was his now, said there was a note, a debt my husband owed him, and the land was the repayment. Another pause. I don't believe the note was real, but I had no way to prove it and no one who would listen. His brother put you out? He gave me a day. I took what I could carry. Her jaw moved slightly. There wasn't much. I looked at the boy. He had dark hair like his mother, and his bare foot was the color of raw cold. I thought about saying something about the foot, but I felt like that wasn't the first thing. "Where did you go?" I asked instead. "Pixton tried to find work. There wasn't any for..." She stopped, started again. "There wasn't any they'd give to a woman with a child. I stayed 4 nights in the livery. The man there was decent enough, but he told me he couldn't keep me past that." She looked at me directly, and there was something in it that wasn't pride exactly, but was close to it, like someone who had decided that looking away would cost her something she couldn't afford. "I walked here from Pixton. 20 miles, that was 20 miles, with a child and whatever she could carry." "That's a long walk," I said, which was a useless thing to say, and I knew it the moment it left my mouth. "Yes," she didn't bother disagreeing or agreeing, just moved past it. "I was told in Pixton that you might be hiring, kitchen work, laundry, anything. I'm a good cook and I'm not afraid of work." She shifted the boy again. He made a small sound and she pressed her hand against his back just once, absently, the kind of touch that comes from 10,000 repetitions of comfort. "I can sleep in the barn if you have no other space. I won't ask for much." I stood there, the wind pushed between us. Here is the thing about ranching alone, and I'd been doing it alone for 3 years, since my wife Clara passed from childbed fever along with the son who never drew a breath. The thing about it is that you stop having to think about other people's needs on a daily basis. You get efficient. You get quiet. You get used to the particular shape of your own solitude, and you stop noticing the ways it has bent you. I was 41 years old, and I had 11 horses, 400 and some cattle, 2 hired hands who lived in the bunkhouse and kept mostly to themselves, and a house with 4 rooms in it, one of which I hadn't opened in 3 years. I was about to say, "Let me think on it," which would have been the careful, uncommitted thing, when the boy lifted his head from his mother's shoulder and looked at me. He had the most serious face I'd seen on a child that small, not frightened, not curious, just grave, like he decided to assess me and was doing it thoroughly. I don't know why that settled something in me. I can't explain it even now, writing it back into the logbook. Something about the gravity of a small boy who had walked 20 miles on the hip of his mother and was still paying attention to the world. "I've got a room," I said, "in the house, if you're not too proud for charity while we figure out the work arrangements." Something shifted in her face, not relief exactly, more like a wall that had been under enormous pressure suddenly had one less thing pressing against it. It didn't come down, just eased. "I'm not too proud for anything right now," she said quietly, and the way she said it, you could hear what it had cost her to learn that. "Come in, then." She followed me to the house. The boy, whose name I would learn was Jonas, watched me over his mother's shoulder the whole way, that same measuring gravity on his small face. I did not know, walking through my own gate in the cold April light, that by nightfall she would have said the words that would go into the logbook and not come back out. I fed them first. That seemed right. Whatever came next could wait while the child ate. I had biscuits from that morning and cold beef, and the remains of a pot of beans that was still reasonable. I set it on the table without ceremony, and Marin Lyle sat Jonas on the bench, and he ate with the kind of methodical focus that told me this was not the first time in recent days he'd been hungry. Children eat differently when they're reliably fed versus when they don't know when the next meal comes. I've seen it with calves, and I've seen it with people, and it's the same. Marin ate less than she should have. I noticed, but I didn't comment. While they ate, I went and opened the room I hadn't opened. Clara's room, which had been ours but which I'd sealed off after, because sleeping in it was impossible and standing in the doorway of it wasn't much better. 3 years of closed air. I opened the window and let the cold through, and it smelled like dust and something faint underneath that I stood still for a moment processing. Then I went back to the kitchen. Jonas had fallen asleep sitting up, his head drooping toward the table. Marin caught him before he hit it smoothly, without looking, pure reflex. "I'll take him," I said. She looked at me. "You don't have to. I'm not squeamish about children." A brief pause. Then she handed him over, and he was heavier than he looked, solid and warm and completely unconscious in the way that small children go absolute surrender to sleep. I carried him to the room and set him on the bed, and stood there for a second with my hand still braced on the mattress, looking at the small shape of him against the coverlet Clara had made. I closed the door quietly. Marin was still at the table when I came back. She hadn't moved except to set her hands flat on the wood in front of her, like she was steadying herself against something. She looked up when I came in. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "I need to tell you something else." I sat down across from her. The lamp was between us, low and yellow. "The brother," she said, "Vern Lyle. He didn't just take the claim." Her jaw was tight. "He told me if I came back, if I made any complaint against him, he knew people who would make it so Jonas would be better off without me." She said it flat, but her hands pressed harder against the table. "I don't know exactly what that means. I know enough to be afraid of it." I looked at her. "He's a dangerous man," I said. It wasn't really a question. "Yes." "And you walked 20 miles in the other direction." I walked away from him. This direction was this was where the road went. There was a silence that went on longer than comfortable. Outside, the wind had picked up again, and somewhere the barn door was knocking against its frame, and I made a note to fix that latch again in the morning. Then Marin Lyle said, "Mr. Briggs." "Calhoun." "Mr. Briggs," she said again, like she wasn't ready to be on first-name terms with what she was about to say. "I don't have anywhere else to go, not anywhere safe. And I know this is a strange and forward thing to say to a man I've known for 3 hours, but I'm past the point where I can afford to be anything but honest." Her eyes were on mine, and they were dark and steady and very tired. "If you'll let us stay, Jonas and me, I'll work. I'll cook and clean and do whatever needs doing on this ranch. And if that's not enough reason for you to take the risk, then I'll be your wife." She stopped. "A real one or not, whatever you decide. But I'll stand in that place legal and proper so he can't come at us through the law. Because a wife and child on a man's ranch is harder to move than a stray woman with no claim and no name in this county." The lamp flickered. She didn't look away. "I have written a lot of things into this logbook. I've written down storms and losses and the small, ordinary dignities of a life lived close to the ground. I've written Clara's name in it, and I've written the date of her passing, and I've written nothing around either because some things don't need framing. I wrote that night. She told me she had nowhere else to go. She asked to stay. She offered to be my wife for protection for her son with full honesty about why. There was no pretending on either side. I'm not sure I've ever respected a person more in my life, and I don't know what to do with that yet. I told her I'd sleep on it. She thanked me without any particular expression. Just a nod, a steadying breath, the hands coming up from the table. She didn't look like a woman asking for a favor. She looked like a woman who had already done the hardest part, which was deciding that she was worth fighting for, even if fighting meant this, walking to a stranger's gate in the April cold, and saying out loud the most vulnerable truth she had. I sat at the table a long time after she went to bed. The barn door knocked, the wind ran along the eaves. And I thought about the boy with the serious face, and the woman with the straight back and the healing split lip, and the particular weight of someone choosing to stay alive when staying is the harder option. I blew out the lamp. I did not sleep much. The next morning was clear. Cold and clear, the sky that particular shade of blue that the high plains do in early spring, almost violent in its brightness, like the land is overcompensating for the gray months. I was at the barn before first light, as usual. The hands, Teodoro, and a younger man we called Patch, who had one cloudy eye from a childhood something or other, were already moving, neither of them speaking much because it was early. That was fine. I didn't need them to speak. When I came back to the house at 7:30, there was smoke from the chimney and a smell coming from inside that stopped me on the porch step. Bacon, real bacon, not the kind you make when you're not paying attention, the kind you make when you're paying complete attention. And something else sweet underneath. I opened the door. The kitchen was different. Not rearranged, everything was where I kept it, but alive in a way it hadn't been in a long time. The fire in the stove properly stoked. The table wiped clean. A cloth, my mother's cloth, one I'd never known what to do with, laid out on it with 2 places set. Jonas was on the floor in the corner with the 2 wooden spoons I'd been using as general-purpose tools, hitting them against the bottom of an overturned pot with absolute concentration and no apparent goal. Marin was at the stove. She heard me come in and turned just enough to see me. "I hope you don't mind. I needed to be useful." "I don't mind." She turned back to the pan. "Jonas, enough." Jonas looked at me instead of stopping. Then he set 1 spoon down, just one. I sat at the table. Marin brought the food over and we ate, she and I sitting across from each other, and Jonah's intermittently abandoning the spoon project to eat and then returning to it, in a quiet that was different from the silence I was used to. That silence had been empty. This one had texture. It had a child banging a pot and a woman passing the salt without being asked, and the small sounds of people occupying the same space. Halfway through eating, without preamble, I said, "All right." Marin looked up. "I've thought about it," I said. "You can stay. The job is real. There's plenty that wants doing here. The room is yours as long as you need it." I set my fork down. "As for the other thing, I'm not going to ask you to marry me to solve a legal problem. That's not—" I stopped. "That's not something either of us should do lightly. But if Vern Lyle comes to this property, he'll know you're here as more than a hired hand. He'll know you're under this roof by invitation of the man who owns it, and that I'll answer for it personally." Her expression was careful. "That may not be enough." "It may not," I agreed. "But let's see what we're dealing with before we do anything we can't undo." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded, once like she was filing it under fair enough and closing the drawer. Jonah's hit the pot 3 times in quick succession. Marin didn't flinch. "He does that," she said. "The noise doesn't bother him. It bothers everyone else. I'll live." Something happened at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile, quite. The idea of one. The shape where a smile went when it was deciding whether to come out. She picked up her fork. I picked up mine. Outside, the April sky burned blue, and the cattle moved in the east pasture, and somewhere Teodoro was singing something under his breath in Spanish that floated through the morning air like it belonged there. I wrote in the logbook that night, "She stayed. Jonah's stayed. We haven't solved anything yet, but the house is warmer than it was yesterday, and I don't think that's only the fire." 3 weeks passed the way good weeks do, when you're busy enough not to count them, in work and small adjustments, and the gradual, almost invisible settling of new things into their places. Marin cooked. Marin cleaned. Marin fixed the hinge on the pantry door that I had been meaning to fix for 7 months, and did it with a screwdriver and a level of calm focus that suggested she had learned not to wait for other people to take care of things. She was up before me every morning. I don't know when she slept. Jonas stopped being shy of me somewhere around day 4 or 5. I cannot point to a specific moment when it changed. It was more of a gradual thaw, the way ice goes at the edge of a creek in early spring, not all at once, but one small piece at a time. He began watching me with that grave attention of his from closer distances, then from beside me. Then, one afternoon when I was mending fence near the house, and he had escaped Marin's notice from directly underfoot. He didn't speak to me for another week after that. He just appeared, near where I was working, present and attentive and getting into things with methodical curiosity. I found him in the tack room one morning, sitting on the floor with my father's old spur in his hands, turning it over and over like he was trying to understand the mechanism of the rowel. I sat down on the trunk beside him. That was my father's. He looked at it, then at me. "The rowel spins," I said. "The whole point of it is the spin." Here, I showed him how to make it turn with one finger, and his eyes went wide, and he did it himself immediately, over and over, the small metal star spinning in the morning light. He said my name for the first time that afternoon. Not Mr. Briggs, just Cal, because that's what he'd heard Marin call me when she stopped being formal about it, sometime around the 2nd week without either of us deciding to make a ceremony of it. I wrote it in the logbook. Jonas called me Cal. I have no idea what to do with that. I should say something about Marin, because I was thinking about her more than the logbook showed. The logbook showed practical things, what she'd fixed, what she'd cooked. The time she rode out with Teodoro to the south pasture, because he needed a second person to help move a downed fence section, and I was down with a bad knee day, and she hadn't ridden much, but she managed it without complaint, came back with mud to the knee and a cut on her hand from wire and didn't make a production of either. What the logbook didn't show was the way she stood at the kitchen window some mornings looking east, toward Pixton, toward whatever she'd left or been driven from. She never stayed there long, a few seconds maybe, and then she'd turn back to whatever she was doing with that deliberate briskness of hers. But I saw it. A man living alone for 3 years learns to notice what happens in his own house even when he's pretending not to. She was watching for something, or someone. I didn't ask, she didn't offer. We had developed a truce of sorts, Marin and I, the kind that forms between people thrown together by circumstance when they're both too tired for games. We were honest with each other in practical terms. We were careful with each other in personal ones. It worked. It had its own rhythm. I had also noticed, and was less sure what to do with this, that she laughed sometimes. Not often and not at obvious things. She laughed when Jonas did something unexpected. She laughed once at something Teodoro said, quick and genuine and gone in a second. She laughed once at me, not unkindly. When I walked into the porch post I'd been walking past for 20 years because I was distracted, and I turned around to see her with one hand over her mouth and her shoulders shaking. "Say nothing," I told her. "I'm saying nothing," she said, and her voice was absolutely shaking with it. That was on a Thursday. The following Tuesday, Vern Lyle came to the gate. I heard him before I saw him. That's how it went. A horse on the road, faster than the road warranted, and then the gate not creaking but banging, thrown open by someone who wasn't concerned with latches. I came out of the barn. He was a large man. Not tall, wide, the kind of wide that comes from years of physical work turned gradually to fat, the way muscle goes when the work stops but the eating doesn't. Dark beard going gray at the jaw. A good horse under him, which said something about his priorities. He had the kind of face that had probably been reasonable once and had been soured slowly by something, resentment, maybe, or the slow grinding of wanting things that hadn't come. He pulled up when he saw me, looked me over. "You Briggs?" "I am. My name is Vern Lyle. I'm looking for a woman called Marin, dark hair about this tall, traveling with a young boy." He said it like he was reporting lost property. "What do you want with her?" Something shifted in his face. He'd expected me to either confirm immediately or deny with obvious discomfort. My tone, which was, I hope, entirely level, seemed to recalibrate him. "She's family," he said. "Brother's widow. I'm concerned for her welfare." "Generous of you." "Another shift. She told you something." "People talk," I said. "You want to get down off that horse." He looked at me. "I'll stay where I am. I just want to speak to her." "She's on my property," I said. "She's here as a guest. She's not available to be spoken to without her choosing to be." He went very still. "What business is it of yours?" I had been thinking about this for 3 weeks. Not just since I saw the bruise on her face and the bare foot of her child, but since she sat at my table and told me the truth in flat, exhausted sentences without asking for anything she hadn't earned. I'd been thinking about it the way I think about fence lines, where the property actually is versus where someone wants it to be. "My business," I said, "is that she's asked to stay here and I've said yes. My further business is that she's proposed a more permanent arrangement and I'm giving it serious consideration." I let that land. "You come back with anything in writing about a debt, you bring it to the county clerk and go through proper channels. You come back here to this property looking for that woman." I didn't finish the sentence. Sometimes the silence after the dash does more work than words. Vern Lyle's jaw tightened. His horse shifted under him, picking up whatever signal his body was sending. "You don't know what you're involving yourself in," he said. "I know exactly what I'm involving myself in," I said. "I've been ranching this land for 22 years and I've settled harder things than this. You do well to remember that before you come back." He looked at me for a long moment, then he looked at the house, deliberately, like he was making sure I understood that he'd noted where it was. Then he turned the horse and went back through the gate, didn't close it behind him. I stood and watched him go until the road was empty. Then I stood a little longer, because that's what you do when something has just been declared that hasn't been stated yet. I turned around. Marin was standing on the porch. I don't know how long she'd been there. Her face was the color of old ash, and she was holding her own elbows like she needed to hold onto something, but she was standing straight, always straight. "You heard," I said. "I heard," she looked at the empty road. "He'll come back." "Yes." "He won't accept," she stopped. "He won't take a conversation for an answer, he takes things." Her eyes came back to me. "The arrangement I mentioned when I came here," she said it careful. I'm not trying to trap you into anything. I want to be clear about that." "I know that. I meant it as a practical offer. A real one, not," she looked away for a second. "I know what it sounds like." "Marin." She looked back. "I told him I was giving it serious consideration," I said. I wasn't lying to him. The silence that followed was a different kind than the ones we'd been building between us. It had weight. It had questions in it that neither of us was ready to answer yet. "I need some time," she said finally. "So do I said, and I meant it." We stood on the porch in the afternoon light, and neither of us said anything else for a while. Somewhere inside the house, Jonas was banging something, the ordinary chaos of him moving through space. Marin exhaled, just once, a long, slow breath out like putting something down. "Thank you," she said, "for what you said to him. It didn't cost me anything." "It cost you something," she said. "Don't pretend it didn't." I didn't answer that because she was right. That night I wrote more than usual. I wrote about Vern Lyle and the way he'd looked at the house. I wrote about the fence line problem, about what was property and what was right and the gap between them. I wrote about Clara, which I hadn't done in a year, which surprised me when I noticed I was doing it. I wrote about the way solitude shapes a person, and whether the shape it had made in me was the right one or just the one I'd gotten used to. Then I wrote, "She said it cost me something. She's right, but I'm starting to think the cost was less than I thought, and I'm trying to figure out why." I closed the book. Outside the window the stars were out, the high, clear, cold kind that make the sky look close and very far at the same time. Inside the house someone moved, soft steps, the creak of the hallway board, the third one from the bedroom door. Then quiet again. I don't know which of us it was. I don't know which of us had gotten up looking for what. The next 3 weeks were a different kind of hard. Patch came to me one morning and told me quietly, without drama, that he'd seen a rider on the East Ridge 2 nights running. Same spot, same time. He said he hadn't said anything because he wasn't sure, but now he was. I thanked him and didn't show what it did to me on the inside. I told Marin. She took it the way she took most things, with a stillness that was not calm exactly, but was controlled. Her hands were around a coffee cup, and she looked at the table. "He's watching," she said. "Seems so." "He does that," she set the cup down. "He did it before, when he decided he wanted the claim. He watched it first, watched Garrett." She stopped. The name her husband sat in the air briefly. "Watched us for a while before he made his move." "What was his move?" "He brought men, short and flat, 3 of them in the night." She didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. But I went to Teodoro and Patch, and I told them both that we were sleeping in shifts for the foreseeable, and they nodded without asking questions. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote to the county clerk, a straightforward letter, inquired about the process for updating records, about a man's right to vouch for a woman and child on his property, about marriage licenses in the county. I didn't tell Marin I'd done it. But the next evening, after Jonas was asleep, she came and sat at the table across from me while I was writing in the logbook. She had a cup of tea she didn't drink, just held, and she said, without looking at me, "Calhoun." She'd never used my full name before. "I think we should talk about it properly," she said. "Not because of Vern, or not only because of Vern." I set down the pen. "I'm listening," I said. She looked at the cup. "I'm not in love with you," she said directly. "I want to say that first because I think you deserve honesty before anything else. I don't have those feelings yet. I don't know if I will." She looked up. "I'm also not using you. I want you to understand the difference." "Tell me the difference," I said, not challenging, genuinely asking. She was quiet for a moment, and I watched her working through it. "Using you would be asking you to take the risk while giving you nothing real back," she said finally. What I want to offer is a real partnership, whatever that becomes. You'd get someone who shows up every day without pretending about what she feels or doesn't feel. And I'd get," she stopped, "safety for him, stability. And the chance to figure out if there's something here worth growing into." She met my eyes. "I think there might be. I wouldn't be honest if I didn't say that." The lamp between us was the same one as the first night, same low yellow light. I thought about the logbook, about writing things down so you don't forget what's real. "I think there might be too," I said. "I wouldn't be honest if I didn't say that." A long silence. "Then maybe we're talking about the same thing," she said. "Maybe we are." She finally drank the tea. I picked the pen back up. Neither of us said anything more. But the silence afterward was different again. One more texture added to the collection we'd been building. one that felt less like standing on the edge of something and more like the first step taken. I didn't write anything in the logbook that night. Some things I thought you don't need to write down. Vern Lyle came back on a Friday. He came with 2 men this time, and they came through the gate without asking. I was ready. Teodoro was on the south side of the yard. Patch was by the barn. I was on the porch with my rifle resting in the crook of my arm, not aimed, just there. Present. The 3 of them pulled up in the yard, and Vern Lyle looked at me, and then at Teodoro, and then at Patch, and then back at me. "I want to speak to Marin," he said. "I already told you," I said. "She's not available to be spoken to without her choosing it." "That woman's is my intended," I said. It was the first time I'd said it out loud, and it settled onto the yard like something solid. "The paperwork has been filed with the county clerk. I'd suggest you ask a lawyer what that means for you before you make any more trips out here." Vern Lyle's face did several things at once. Anger was the loudest one, but underneath it there was something else, a calculation running, visible if you knew where to look. A man reassessing the odds. "She's told you lies," he said. "She told me she needed somewhere safe," I said. "I agreed she did. That conversation's done." One of the 2 men with him shifted. I looked at him, just looked. He went still. "This isn't over," Vern said. "I know," I said. "Most things aren't, but this part of it is. Leave my property." He stared at me. A long moment that was meant to communicate something, threat, maybe, or the promise of future complication. Then he turned. The 2 men turned with him. They went back through the gate, and I stayed on the porch until the sound of the horses faded down the road. Then I let out a breath I'd been holding since Thursday. Behind me, the door opened. I turned around. Marin was in the doorway with Jonas on her hip, and her chin up and her eyes bright. Not with tears exactly, but with something that had been compressed a long time and was releasing now in small, careful measures. She didn't say thank you again. I think she knew I didn't want that. What she said was, "He'll try something else." "Probably," I said. "Are you ready for something else?" I looked at her, at Jonas, who was looking at me with that grave, measuring face of his, at the gate in the distance and the road going east. "I'm ready for it," I said. "We'll handle it the same way." Jonas reached out and patted my arm once with his small hand, businesslike. Then he went back to studying the yard. I wrote in the logbook that night. Vern Lyle came and left. The paperwork is real. So is everything else, I think, though we're still figuring out the shape of it. Something is being built here. I don't know yet what it will look like when it's done. I'm not sure either of us does, but we're both still here, and that seems like enough for now. Summer came the way it always does in that country, without asking, all at once, the heat arriving like a judgment between one week and the next. The creek dropped. The grass went from green to gold in a matter of days. The cattle pressed toward the shade trees in the afternoon and wouldn't move from them, and you couldn't blame them. We married in June. I'm going to say that plainly, the way Marin would want it said, without dressing it up into something soft and hazy. We went to the county seat on a Wednesday because that was the day Judge Halloran held court, and Teodoro came as a witness, because we needed one and he was the most reliable person either of us knew. And Patch stayed with Jonas, who was indignant at being left behind, and showed it by sulking on the porch in a posture that was so precisely his mother's that both Marin and I had to look away from each other on the wagon to keep from laughing. The ceremony was about 4 minutes. Halloran was a practical man. He'd married railroad workers and widows and land speculators, and at least one pair who'd arrived on the same horse and left on it too. He did not bring flourish to the proceedings. When it was done, Marin and I walked out of the courthouse into the June heat and stood for a moment on the step. Teodoro had gone ahead to the wagon. We were briefly, entirely alone. She looked at me, I looked at her. Neither of us said anything for a second. Then she said, Well, I agreed. She reached over and straightened my collar, which didn't need straightening. Then she dropped her hand and looked at the street, and that corner of the mouth thing happened again, the idea of a smile working itself up. "I think we should get Jonas," she said. "I think so too," I said. We walked to the wagon. I will not pretend the summer was simple. I don't know how to pretend things into the logbook. The logbook won't hold it. Vern Lyle did try something else. It wasn't direct. He was smarter than that. or had become smarter now that the direct approaches had landed him nothing. He put it around in Pixton that the marriage was improper, that there'd been something inappropriate in the arrangement, that questions should be asked. He told someone who told someone who told someone that Jonas wasn't his brother's child at all, which was a lie cruel enough that I heard it and felt something cold and sharp run through me. Maren heard it too. I don't know from whom, she didn't tell me right away. She told me on an evening in late July when we were sitting on the porch after Jonas had been put to bed, the heat finally easing toward something bearable, and she said it in the same flat way she said most hard things, without decoration, without asking for a particular response. People are saying things, she said, about Jonas, about how we got married. I looked at her. I know. He's Garrett's child, she said, not defensive, not tearful, just clear and firm the way she was when she needed something to be absolutely understood. He's got Garrett's eyes. I have never, she stopped, started again. I want you to know that. Because whatever people say out there, you're the one who needs to know the truth. Maren, I said, I've never had a moment's doubt about it. She looked at me. Something moved across her face, complicated and fast, and then gone. Garrett was a good man, she said. He wasn't strong the way Vern is strong, but he was good. He built the claim with his hands, and he was gentle with Jonas, and he would have, she stopped again. Longer this time. He would have been a good father, he just ran out of time. I said nothing. Sometimes there's nothing to say that doesn't diminish the thing being said. She looked at the yard. At the horses in the far corner of the paddock, their shapes dark against the pale evening. I'm not replacing him, she said. I want to be clear about that, too. This, she gestured slightly at the house, at the space between us. This isn't me forgetting him. I know, I said. Do you? I buried someone, too, I said quietly. I know what it means to build something new without it being a betrayal of what came before. A long quiet, the kind that has respect in it. Do you ever, she started slowly, picking the words with care. Do you ever talk to her, Clara? It was the first time she'd said the name. I'd told her about Clara early on, practically, in the way you explain a room and why it was closed. Sometimes, I said, in the mornings when I'm checking on the horses. She nodded, like that made complete sense, which to her apparently it did. I talked to Garrett, she said. When Jonas does something I wish he could have seen. We sat with that between us, the evening settling in. Somewhere out past the fence a nighthawk called and another answered. Thank you, she said finally, for not making me feel like that's strange. I don't think anything you do is strange, I said, and I meant it in a way that I hoped she heard correctly, not flattery, not courtship. Just the truth of having watched her for 4 months and understood that she operated by an interior logic that was entirely consistent and entirely her own. She turned her head and looked at me. It was a different kind of looking than I'd gotten from her before. Not the assessment at the gate, not the careful measurement of a woman deciding how much to trust. Something more relaxed than that. Something that had decided. I didn't know what to do with it. I'm not sure I've ever known what to do with being looked at like that. I cleared my throat and looked at the horses. She made a sound that was very definitely a laugh, quickly suppressed. Cal, she said. Don't. I didn't say anything. You were about to. I absolutely was, she agreed. And the laugh came out fully this time, quiet and warm and so unexpectedly easy that something in my chest did a thing I hadn't felt in years, not dramatic, nothing like a blow. More like a note struck on an instrument that had been in a closed room for a long time, surprising both of us with the fact that it still worked. August brought news from Pixton in the form of a letter from the county clerk. A man named Husties who I had known for 15 years, and who had the moral rectitude of a fence post and twice the usefulness. Husties wrote that a complaint had been filed against Maren. Against me. Something about fraud, though the specifics were deliberately vague in a way that meant Vern Lyle had been spending money on a lawyer who knew how to make vague sound serious. I read the letter at the kitchen table. Maren read it over my shoulder, her hand on the table next to mine. I knew he'd find something like this, she said. It's nothing, I said, it's noise. Husties is telling me about it because he knows Lyle, and he knows this is harassment. Noise can become real if it gets in front of the wrong judge. Then we make sure it doesn't get in front of the wrong judge. I folded the letter. I'm going to Pixton tomorrow. I want to take Husty some documentation, our marriage record, the property documentation, anything that shows this household as a functioning legal entity. If Lyle's lawyer wants to file something, let them file it properly and we'll answer it properly. She looked at me. You're not angry. I'm very angry, I said. I'm just not going to be angry in a way that gives him anything useful. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'll come with you. You don't have to. I'll come with you, she said again, and it was not a question the second time. Teodoro took Jonas the next morning, and Marin and I rode to Pixton. 2 horses, side by side on a road I'd ridden alone for 20 years, the August heat already building before 8 o'clock. We didn't talk much on the ride out. We didn't need to. There was something in riding alongside another person, just the proximity, the synchronization of pace, that said things words made clumsy. In Pixton, Husty's was exactly as useful as I knew he would be. He took our documentation, he listened. He explained the legal landscape with the dry precision of a man who had seen this exact species of small county vindictiveness many times before. He also told us, in the same dry tone, that there had been another complaint about Vern Lyle himself, filed by a family in Coleswood, which was a town 30 miles further east that I'd never had occasion to visit. What kind of complaint? I asked. The debt and property kind, Husty said. Same method, seems like, different family. They got a lawyer who actually showed up. He looked at us over his spectacles. I suspect your brother-in-law is about to discover that you cannot run the same play twice in the same territory and expect nobody to notice the pattern. Marin said nothing, but her hand, which was resting on the arm of the chair next to mine, went very still. On the ride back, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, it wasn't just us. No, there were others. She said it slowly, like she was following a thread. I think I believed it was personal, that he hated me specifically or hated Garrett or wanted the claim specifically. She looked at the road ahead. It wasn't personal, we were just convenient. Some people are like that, I said carefully. It doesn't make it better, she said. And it doesn't make it worse, it just makes it, she searched for the word. Smaller, the thing I've been running from is smaller than I built it to be. I glanced at her. Smaller doesn't mean it wasn't real. No, she said. No, I know that. She straightened on the horse, a familiar gesture. I just mean, I've been carrying it like it was enormous and specific and insurmountable, and it might just be solvable. It is solvable, I said. It's already mostly solved. She looked at me. Because of you. Because of you, I said. You walked to that gate, you knocked. Solvable only matters if the person does the work to get there. She held my eyes for a second. Then she looked away at the hills, and the corner of her mouth did its thing. But this time it didn't stop there. It kept going, slow and real, into something that was fully a smile, turned mostly toward the horizon and whatever she was thinking about in that direction. I didn't ask what it was. I just rode beside her. September, the heat breaking, the first cool mornings coming back in. Jonas turned 4 in September. I know this because Marin told me, and I wrote it in the logbook. He spent the day with focused intensity making what he described, through gesture and a few words, as a fort, using every cushion and blanket in the house, several buckets from the barn, and a length of rope that I was missing for 3 days before I found it woven into the structure. I was recruited to defend the fort. I did not ask against what. The nature of the threat was apparently obvious. Marin watched from the kitchen doorway while I crouched on one side of a blanket wall and pretended to repel attacks from an invisible force, and Jonas directed operations with absolute seriousness from the command position, which was the center of the structure with a wooden spoon held as what I could only interpret as a scepter. At some point I looked up, and she was not in the doorway anymore. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor 3 feet from the fort, and she had brought her tea, and she was laughing, really laughing, openly, the kind she rarely gave the world, and Jonas turned to look at her with an expression of total betrayal that only deepened her laughter, and then it got me too. We were still there when Teodoro knocked on the door an hour later. He looked at the devastation of the furniture and the 3 of us on the floor, and he said, very seriously, "I will come back later," and then took himself out again. I wrote it in the logbook. I know I said some things don't need writing, but I wrote this one. The fort fell. Jonas was the last one standing. Marin laughed like I haven't heard a person laugh in longer than I can name. I don't know what this is. I know it's real. I know it belongs to all three of us. I know that's enough. Vern Lyle came one final time in October. He came alone. That was the difference, no horse, on foot, arriving at the gate in the gray early morning with the look of a man who had been drinking and not sleeping in roughly equal proportion. He was smaller somehow. Or maybe I was looking at him differently than I had in April. I came out of the house when I saw him at the gate. I didn't bring the rifle. I didn't signal Teodoro or Patch. He looked at me when I reached the gate. "I'm done," he said, flat, not defeated exactly, exhausted. I waited. "The family in Coleswood," he said. "Their lawyer," he stopped. "It's done, I've signed papers, the whole thing," his jaw worked. "I'm leaving the county." I looked at him. He looked back at me, and there was something in his face I hadn't expected. Not remorse exactly, more like the ghost of something that had been something else a long time ago, before it curdled. A person looking at the distance between who they'd intended to be and who they'd become. I didn't know what to say to that. I'm not sure there's anything to say to that. "My brother," he said. "Garrett," he stopped again. "He was the one our mother liked." His voice was entirely flat. "I don't say that to excuse anything." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." He nodded like I'd confirmed something. "Tell the boy," he stopped for the third time, then he shook his head. "Never mind." He turned and walked back toward the road. I stood at the gate and watched him go. The morning was gray and cool, and very still in the way October mornings in that country get, like the land is catching its breath before the cold comes in. I don't know what I felt. Complex things, nothing that resolved. I turned around. Marin was on the porch again. She'd seen from the distance, though she couldn't have heard. She looked at me with a question in her face. I shook my head slightly. "It's done." She stood still for a moment. Then she let out a breath, the longest, slowest breath I had ever seen a person take, and she sat down on the porch step and put her face in her hands. Not crying, just letting go, all the weight of 6 months of watching the road, setting it down. I walked back across the yard. I sat down beside her on the step. She didn't take her face out of her hands for a while. I didn't say anything. Jonas appeared in the doorway behind us, looked at the two of us sitting on the step, and apparently decided this was normal enough because he went back inside. Eventually Marin raised her head. Her eyes were dry. Her face was the color it got when she was running on reserve, that particular pallor of exhaustion that she'd had when she first came through the gate, which I hadn't seen in months. "Is it over?" she said. "I think so," I said. "I think it's as over as it's going to be." She nodded once. She looked at the gate. "Tell me something," she said. "Tell me something that has nothing to do with any of this." I thought about it. "Patch got a letter yesterday," I said. "From his mother. She's moved to Denver. She wants him to come see her." Marin turned to look at me. "Is he going to go?" "He doesn't know yet." "He should go," she said. "That's what I told him." She looked at the gate again. Then at the sky, where the clouds were moving from the north, the first cold front of autumn pressing down. "I didn't think I'd feel," she stopped. "I don't know what I thought I'd feel when it was over." "What do you feel?" She thought about it seriously, the way she did everything. "Tired," she said, "and very glad to be here, just here in this specific place." She turned and looked at the house, at the yard, at the gate where a man had come and gone and would presumably not come again. "I didn't let myself feel that before, glad to be somewhere specific." I understood that. I understood it the way you understand things you've lived for a long time without being able to name. "I'm glad you're here," I said. It came out simpler than I intended, but that was fine. Simple was probably right. She looked at me. We were sitting close. The porch step wasn't wide, and she reached over and took my hand. Just that. Deliberately. Not the way you take someone's hand because you're afraid or because you need something. The way you take a hand when you have decided something and want to mark the decision in a way that has weight. I held it. We sat there for a while. The clouds moved. The wind picked up from the north, the first bite of real cold in it. Inside the house, Jonas was making sounds of some project in progress, something that involved dragging something heavy across the floor, and some commentary in the mix of words and sounds he used when he was deep in concentration. "We should go in," Marin said. He's going to pull something over. Probably, I said. Neither of us moved for another few minutes. I wrote the last entry I'll include here in the logbook on the first real cold day of autumn. November, the kind of morning that smells like frost and wood smoke, and the particular clean nothing of air that hasn't warmed yet. I wrote, my father said a man who doesn't write down what happens to him forgets what's real. I've been keeping this record for 20 years, and I am only now beginning to understand what he meant. Not the events, not the practical things. What's real is the people who are here when you close the book and look up. Marin is in the kitchen, Jonas is underfoot, Teodoro and Patch are in the yard. The cattle are in the south pasture, and the fence on the east side needs work, and there will be ice in the troughs by next week, and there is no end to the work there ever is. She came through the gate in April with her chin up and her back straight and 20 miles of hard road behind her and a child on her hip and the truth in her mouth. She asked to stay, and I said yes, and neither of us knew then what that would mean. I think I'm beginning to know.